All right. So my name is Jackie Brilling and I'm JD'79. And I have the honor of being the immediate past president of the Alumni Association and the current Development Committee chair. And I'd like to welcome you to today's event, which is hosted by the Vermont Law School Graduate, Vermont Law and Graduate School Association, Alumni Association. And thanks for joining us. Before I introduce today's speaker, though, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you. First, as I said before, while some of us were on the call, if you'd like to rename yourself, you can go up to the three dots in the upper right hand corner and click that and select the rename option and add your graduating year and degree so that all the ones on the call know who you are. Uh, During today's call, we'd ask that you mute yourself so that the speaker can be free of distractions and background noise. And feel free to enter questions into the chat uh, feature, and or I guess you can wait until the end at the Q&A portion of the event and unmute yourself and ask questions. Lastly, um, he will be sending slides with the presentation to anyone who wishes Vermont CLE credits. This is CLE pre-approved, and by the way, is the first time we are doing a virtual CLE through the webinar series. So today, we will be discussing how we have become disillusioned with the lack of ethics in our corporate and government officials. Generally, there prevails a mistrust in government, even corporations and institutions. We will explore why this has happened and what creates and sustains good leadership, and hopefully how the public trust can be restored. Now, I was a career public service working for many years in New York State government in the executive branch for various agencies. Towards the end of my career from 2003 to 2013, I was appointed secretary to the New York State Public Service Commission, and together with the New York State Board on Electric Generation, Siting, and the Environment. And that was pursuant to 16 NYCRR Section 7. In that capacity, I acted as ethics officer for the agency, and I interfaced with governor staff and oversaw administration and implementation of the ethics laws applicable to public employees. And these included the Public Officers Law and the Public Service Law. And, these contained provisions prohibiting acceptance of gifts or solicitation of employment from any entity that was regulated by our commission, and the acceptance of income from outside employment without prior agency approval, and limitations on the acceptance of, honoraria and prohibitions of any activities that would generally be evidence the appearance of impropriety or lead the public to believe that there was a breach of the public trust. And there were also restrictions on post-employment. And these were found in the Public Officers Law, sections 73 and 74, and the Public Service Law, section 15 of NYCRR. And it's also a criminal offense for any public service employee or agent to divulge confidential information, which the employee learns during their employment. Similar provisions relating to confidentiality are found in the Public Officers Law, and they can subject public employees to fines and forfeitures. And there are provisions just like this in other state governments and in the federal government. And in addition, New York State employees above a certain grade or any even unpaid commissioners have to file annual financial disclosure statements that are made publicly available and list all revenue sources for the employee and their family members that include investments, business holdings, and outside activities such as board memberships for both for profit and not for profit boards. You know, these requirements are imposed in an effort to maintain confidence and trust in our state employees among members of the public. So, and as you know, there are similar expectations for ethical reporting under Sarbanes-Oxley and semi-annual reporting for financial advisors and stockbrokers. And even in the face of these requirements, public officials and government leaders go off the rails. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Vermont Law and Graduate School professor and alumna Margaret Olnek, JD'92. Uh, and Margaret joined Vermont Law School faculty in 2018, and she specializes in a range of family law issues. Margaret has worked for 25 years as an attorney. Since 2001, she's represented clients primarily in the area of divorce and child custody and is a divorce coach. She's experienced in every facet of litigation, including trial prep, depositions, negotiation, settlement, and appeals. She's also an active participant in various forms of dispute resolution and has acted as a mediator and arbitrator on family law cases. Today, she will help us to explore the topic of leadership and why, despite all these legal and ethical requirements, we still have a failure of leaders to do the right thing in ethical situations. Margaret, thank you for leading us in this very important topic.
Thanks for having me. So I'm just going to get right into it, and I'm going to start by breaking the rules right away. I do want you to unmute for just a minute so that you can talk to me a little bit about how you define leadership. So my question is what personality traits or qualities would you use to describe a leader that you would willingly follow? So just let me know what comes to mind. You could put it in the chat. Just what words come to mind when you think about leadership traits, leadership qualities. If I don't see on anything, I'll call on you. Let's see something. Trustworthy and honorable. Thanks, Lauren. What else? A good listener. Skills. Transparent, strong vision for the organization, accountability. Anything else comes up? Think about anything. What do you think of when you curious, forthright? Any other things that you think of when you think of what would make a good leader? So passionate, communication skills, oath taking. Exactly. So let's compare some of these. Still, desire to do the job well. That's excellent as well. So let's just compare these to traits that researchers have identified. So researchers have spent a fair amount of time on this, and it's a growing body of work. They found actually that leadership qualities cluster into 5 categories. Oh boy, here we go. Okay, 5 categories. So the first one is the personal: self-awareness, humility, self-control, conscientiousness, courage, and willingness to take a stand. And I'm highlighting some of the ones I'm going to talk about. The interpersonal: social intelligence, empathy, persuasion, and collaboration. Values: these are some of the ones that you hit on: integrity, ethics, honesty, trust, and service. Vision: we usually think of that often first, about having vision, but that's only one of several qualities that a leader should have. Whether the person is forward thinking and inspirational. And finally, technical competence: knowledge, preparation, and judgment. Actually, technical competence In law school, we've traditionally focused on this and not so much on the development of the other traits. So some researchers will say that leadership is not a trait, but it is a skill or a behavior. And it's a complex area of psychological study, but it's worth understanding what makes a good leader, because who leads and how they lead has an impact on our future, on our happiness, and on our productivity. Over time, we've seen many examples of people who embody at least some of these qualities, and we've seen how those qualities have inspired others to action. There are leaders everywhere, as you know, at home, at work, in sports, in government, and leaders of social movements. So what is the test of a good leader? It is actually that the leader helps the group. If the group becomes effective at defining and achieving its goals because of the leader's participation. A common misconception is actually that a leader needs to have charisma. Researchers have found that charisma does not predict success, and that people who score high in charisma do not necessarily score high in performance. Again, as charisma goes up, their perceived effectiveness declines. Lots of times charismatic leaders, and I think those are the people that we're taken with right away, right? We're taken with them right away. They seem terrific, but over time, their overconfidence, and if they're narcissistic, that comes out, and we see that they're uninterested in day-to-day operational activities. And how they impair performance is that, and I think this is particularly true when you're not so sure, but a leader shows up and they're very sure about how things should go. You sort of turn over your power to that leader, rely on their judgment, and fail to challenge them. So you kind of give up your agency. So as I was thinking about how to prepare for this talk, I caught a news report about a Gallup poll. It's given every year, and it asks people a bunch of questions, and one of which is, what is the main problem facing the U.S.? This was at the end of 2022, and you can see that the government was cited as the top problem. Inflation was second to that. But when I drilled down into the Gallup website and the poll itself, I found that what had happened was the participants were asked an open-ended question. It was their question number 7. What do you think is the most important problem facing the country today? And so people wrote all kinds of things. And then the Gallup people organized it into different categories. And it turns out that the category actually says, the grouped answer is, it's not just the government. It's not really the government. It's poor leadership within the government. And so if you think about it, if we have good leaders, we can define what our values are with them, what the problems are we're trying to solve, for example, the environment, and get after it, right? So, but without leadership, we can't do any of those types of things. So the question becomes, who holds the positions of leadership in federal and state government? We can start with US presidents. More than half of them have been lawyers, and that's just presidents. Lawyers are members of Congress. They hold staff positions in federal and state government. They're state governors, they're state legislators, they're judges, they're district attorneys. And that's just the public sector, right? So in the private sector, they're also managing attorneys, managing partners of law firms. They're heads of for-profit and nonprofit corporations. And even when lawyers don't occupy top positions where they work, they end up leading various teams and committees, task forces, and they sit on profit and nonprofit boards. The reality is no occupation is more responsible for producing leaders than the law. And this is interesting to me because lawyers make up only approximately 0.3 to 0.4% of the population. So if the biggest issue facing the United States is government / lack of leadership, and lawyers are overrepresented in top governmental positions as opposed to other occupations, then it's us. It's lawyers who are failing. We're failing as leaders. You can probably come up with your own list of examples of lawyers who are or have been leaders whose behavior is either unethical or reckless or both. My go-to lately is, of course, Rudy Giuliani. But of course, he's not alone and he's not unique. So the question, if he's not alone or not unique, why do leaders sometimes fail so spectacularly? And to understand this, I think we have to further develop our understanding of leadership and leadership theory. So back to Rudy as my example, Rudy was someone who people of both parties admired. And if you think back to his early career, he was a celebrated federal prosecutor in New York. He aggressively pursued businesses that were linked to organized crime. And he put his own life at risk when he did that. He received threats. He also went after insider trading on Wall Street. If you recall the names Ivan Boesky, Michael Milken, he was involved in those efforts, which a lot of people didn't appreciate him going after insider trading. And then after that, he became mayor of New York, and he was reelected as mayor of New York. Towards the end of his second term, that's when 9/11 happened. And he rose to the occasion and coordinated the city's response. His approval rating during 9/11 skyrocketed to 79%. And we all started calling him America's mayor for his inspirational leadership in the aftermath of those attacks. As an aside, I also read that I didn't recall this, but that he pushed to try to extend his term because of the emergency. And that was a failed attempt. He wasn't able to get his term to be extended on an emergency basis. The election went forward. Then a few years later, in 2006, he was rated the most popular politician of either party, even over Obama. And he made a run for president. But now we know him as Trump's personal lawyer and a promoter of false election claims. And we also know him from some totally embarrassing media interviews. He's become someone who people ridicule. Leadership theory actually has a term for this, and it's called genius to folly, referring to a leader who's lost their humility and starts to believe that they're invulnerable and that their invulnerability will provide a shield for their unethical behavior. Humility was one of the leadership qualities that we listed at the beginning there. And it's possible that with Rudy, he may have always had his issues with humility. He was constantly seeking the spotlight, especially after 9/11. So when his long association, he and Trump knew each other from way back in New York, when that paid off and he became Trump's personal attorney, he was just a step away from one of the most powerful people in the world. And he may have become just too preoccupied with power itself and the spoils that he hoped would follow. So he told the president exactly what the president wanted to hear. And of course, if you've been following, he was suspended not last summer, but the summer before in New York. And he's facing disbarment in DC. To be fair, we can look at the Democratic side of things and take a look at Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York, as another example of genius to folly. He was elected 3 times to be the governor of New York after having been the attorney general, I believe. And he was highly celebrated too. And especially as a result of his management or his daily briefings during COVID, that's when he became more of a national leader. He was totally admired. And I don't know if any of you have seen the Randy Rainbow. You could Google him on YouTube as proof of how appealing. He did some music videos that are hilarious about how much we admired Andrew Cuomo during that time. But with his team behind closed doors, He was described as a bully and therefore not a collaborator, which we would expect of a good leader. His inner circle shrunk over time, and there were indications that he would intimidate his own advisors. He, again, it's the humility issue. He lacked humility. And it turns out that during COVID, when everybody was tuning into him on a daily basis, he was obsessing over his ratings, which sounds like others we've heard of. With regard to the deliveries of supplies and vaccines, he wanted those to come through him to the state and not directly to the mayor of New York City. He wanted those photo ops over the mayor, and he didn't want the mayor to get credit for those types of things. So when the many sexual harassment allegations surfaced, and I think also his handling of the nursing homes, he maintained a belief in his own invulnerability and assumed he could survive those sexual harassment allegations, which many leaders have. But he lost all support as a leader and ended up resigning in disgrace. So really, a lot of leadership theory explains some of this behavior. So why are we talking about leadership today? This webinar actually came about because we heard from one of our alums from our master's programs. One of them, I don't know which one, but they were concerned about all the news about lawyers today who seem to take positions that suggest that they either don't understand their legal training or they just willingly disregard the law. So the alum was concerned about how this could be given our training, and he rightly noted that unethical lawyers give the entire profession a bad name, a bad reputation. And so I just have to address an assumption behind that question. Their question suggests that our lackluster reputation is a new problem for lawyers, but in fact, it's a very old problem. And our image problem has existed for as long as there has been a profession. When I started looking into this, I found that it goes back to the Bible. There is a reference in the in the Gospels. Woe unto you also, ye lawyers, for ye laid men with burdens grievous to be borne, and ye yourselves don't touch the burdens. I can't even see underneath it now, with one of your fingers. In addition, I found a joke that goes back to medieval times. What craft is your father of? One man asked another. Marry, he is a crafty man of law, the other replied. So there's plenty of commentary from that time period that shows that people believe that lawyers created too much litigation, not unlike today, and cheated the system for their own profit and were essentially dishonest. So as lawyers, we've always had our scandals. There was in England in 1289, extreme dissatisfaction with the justice system and its officials. There were accusations of bribery and other crimes, and this scandal resulted in the removal of all of the king's bench justices at the time. So, who were the lawyers? We know that in England for centuries, it was men who became lawyers. They were members of the elite and landowners. And if they weren't, as lawyers, they became closely associated with the elite and with the ruling class. When our colonial ancestors left England, they disliked lawyers so much, and especially their association with the ruling class, that while lawyers in colonial times here in the U.S. were allowed to practice, it was actually illegal for them to get paid. On the left is I found this. There was this body of liberties from Massachusetts, Rule 26. They make it sound positive. Unpaid attorneys allowed. Someone translated this old writing here that says clients can give their lawyers no fee or reward for their pains. Um, the public, just hasn't trusted lawyers and didn't trust lawyers at this time. And they thought that they make the process much more complicated than it needs to be. So this law, which is prohibiting money for legal services, you can understand where it comes from. From an ethics perspective, when money is involved, it's becomes easier to convince yourself that it's perhaps okay to file an action without any evidence and support, or to engage in dilatory tactics if that is a way to drag it out and get paid more as a result. We, of course, now have specific ethical rules to the contrary, but money and power are just their timeless temptations. So a little more history for you. Before the Civil War, lawyers were used as courtroom lawyers, arguing before tribunals, and really that was mostly it. It wasn't really until the 1800s or so when there was enormous growth in industry. The railroads, for example, commerce was becoming more complicated, and legislators were facing more complicated issues of rights of way, et cetera. And we needed lawyers to help fashion new laws and to assist with more complicated transactions. So basically, as commerce grew in the 1800s, lawyers became more necessary. They were accepted, but really only grudgingly and only as a necessary evil, sad to say. By way of comparison, doctors have always been more highly regarded than lawyers have been. So let's just fast forward to the 1970s when we had our own enormous scandal involving a lot of lawyers. The Watergate scandal, which involved the Nixon White House and his bid for re-election. There was a conspiracy to break into the Democratic national headquarters at the Watergate office building, and then the cover-up of that crime. That scandal landed 29 lawyers in jail, including White House counsel John Dean. And Nixon resigned. He resigned he was an unindicted co-conspirator. And you may not realize, or you may have forgotten, that it was the failure of so many lawyers in Watergate that caused the American Bar Association to subsequently to require all law schools to make professional responsibility and ethics a required course for law students. And more news, there's a new generation bar exam that's coming out in 2026, where not only the ethics will be tested as part of the separate MPRE exam, but it will also be a required subject on the new bar. So basically, our reputation as lawyers is an old problem, not a new one, and we may be burdened with that reputation for some time to come. But despite all of these historical points and the more current scandals, it's still true that no occupation is more responsible for creating leaders than the law. And lawyers can and still do command respect when they act thoughtfully and know their craft and help to achieve positive results for people. But the question I have is, does the law actually create leaders, or does the law simply attract people who want to lead, who want to change things, and who want to make a difference in our world? Many of you held leadership positions before you came to law school, and then during law school, and you continue to hold various leadership positions now. You probably already possess some innate leadership skills. And I guess the challenge is to improve and hone the skills that you do have while keeping a laser focus on your personal values and being especially mindful of your ethical duties as a lawyer. We know that ethical questions arise constantly, sometimes daily for people. And the ethics rules have been revised multiple times. And they now provide extensive commentary on how the rules apply to specific situations. But not very many lawyers consult the ethics rules on a regular basis. I thought I would highlight one ethics rule for our talk, which is that I think has to do greatly with leadership. It's Model Rule of Professional Conduct 2.1, and you all have your individual state or federal rules that you're following. That most of them sometimes import it exactly the same or with some small changes. So this is the rule that sort of reminds us that we're not hired guns, but by virtue of our knowledge, we are in a unique position to lead by persuading our clients, not with regard to just legal considerations, but also moral considerations. And this rule applies to us whether we're advising individuals, corporations, governmental entities, or politicians. This is our duty. Our duty is to provide candid legal advice when we're advising the leaders that are above us. And in many instances, that itself is an act of courage. I wanted to show you Elihu Root. This is my favorite comment. Half the practice of a decent lawyer is telling would-be clients that they are damn fools and should stop. So we've moved a little bit into lawyers, we're treating it as their clients, their customers. And we've heard that mantra a lot, give the customer what they want, but that is not our job. Our job is to be strong and to tell them what the law is and how they should and shouldn't behave. And we're in a position to do that. They're coming to us. They picked us because they trust us. So we have their trust and we can help guide others' behavior. But when we are the lawyer in that position that has to give the advice, that question then becomes an individual one for us. Are we going to be able to be courageous enough to take a stand and to tell our clients or our boss something that they don't want to hear? Are we self-confident enough to do that? And more importantly, are we willing to suffer the potential personal or professional or financial consequences if our advice is not well received? So I think you just have to trust that despite any short-term setbacks, there'll be long-term gains as a result of your integrity. The good news about this rule 2.1 is that no lawyer has ever been disciplined for violating this rule. I think that's another reason why lawyers don't really sit and think about this rule and what it means, because it just sort of doesn't come up in the disciplinary context. I actually think that lawyers and others in more recent times have learned from the lessons of Watergate, partly because of this push that the Bar Association has made and continues to make, so that ethics and professional responsibility are taken seriously, and we prosecute lawyers more than we ever did in the past for violations. But I think we have current examples of people that did learn from the lessons of Watergate. So here's Pat Cipollone, who was White House counsel to Trump. He held the same position as John Dean did during the Nixon administration. He's not going to jail. We know that he personally opposed the challenge to the election results. And for example, also Sidney Powell's idea to seize the voting machines. And he worked to stop Trump from joining the mob that attacked the Capitol. He had to be really careful in his testimony to the January 6th Commission to not violate privilege by telling us about his specific conversations and how he advised President Trump. But it seems pretty clear from his conversations with others what he did believe. And we can surmise that he would have made strong attempts to persuade the president. And he did act ethically in this regard. This next one is my favorite, of course, Cassidy Hutchinson, who's a young woman. She was 25 when she testified at the January 6th hearings. She lied initially, and then, but she had lied after her lawyer had coached her and pressured her by saying that she needed to protect the president. And he also dangled lucrative future employment to convince her to continue to, sort of evade the questions. Her lawyer also chose not to tell her that his fees were being paid for by a Trump PAC, and not revealing that and not obtaining her informed consent was in direct violation of Rule 1.8 of the conflicts rules. Later, she came forward, though, and she told the truth, despite this lawyer's pressure and to that lawyer's extreme surprise. His firm, I don't know if they got rid of him right away. There was consequences for him right away when this came out. It turns out that Cassidy Hutchinson was inspired by John Dean, the White House counsel to Nixon. She wanted to be, he was the first, actually. He lied at first, and then he became the first in the inner circle to tell the truth to Congress. John Dean wasn't involved in the burglary, but he was kind of caught up unwittingly in the cover-up. But he then told the truth. And but still, he went to jail because he was involved in the cover-up. So here's Cassidy listening to that. She also apparently talked to a legislator who said to her that she had to think about how'd she feel about living with her actions for the rest of her life. So after she got that advice and listened to the testimony of John Dean and perhaps Butterfield, he was the one who exposed the existence of the tapes that Nixon requested be installed in the White House to tape record his presidency, and it tape recorded a bunch of crimes. So she demonstrates this extreme courageousness and willingness to take a stand, which are the qualities of a leader. Another one we've got is Raffensperger. He takes a stand directly against the president's pressure. He was an important and vocal break from many others in his party to reveal what was going on behind the scenes to overturn the election. And another leader who emerges is Liz Cheney, who would have easily won re-election to the House as Representative Wyoming before she took on her leadership role in the January 6th investigation and hearings. She has a lot of political savvy, and she was very aware of the consequences, which did ensue. But like Cassidy Hutchinson, she decided she was going to take the long view. Here's a couple of statements from an article here. I well understood the potential political consequences of abiding by my duty, right? So that's what we're called. That's our duty. That's what we're called to do and to protect. So what I can say about what are good leaders, who are good leaders? They are the people who are self-aware and are humble and remain that way. And they have to be able to handle feedback and have advisors who are willing to give them feedback. And they need to be people who continue to see their role as being in service to others and not to themselves. And like I said, I think surrounding yourself with advisors who are able to push back, that's what a good leader does and has, and that's our role when we're acting as advisors. So if you are doing this kind of advising already, this is proof that you have these leadership qualities, they're in you. And if you realize that this might be an area where you can improve, you're demonstrating the self-awareness that it takes to become a good leader. There's always plenty of room for good leaders. And we know that there's good leaders out there. We know them when we come across them because we become better better people, better employees, better lawyers, and even better leaders ourselves. Because this is a class, I'm going to leave you with a leadership exercise. Oh, here we go with the 5 categories one last time. I really think the strongest ones here are, well, technical competence is kind of at the bottom because that's the building block to get you into your leadership position. But it's humility and courage and ethics, I think are the primary ones that you need, that will demonstrate your ability to lead over time. So when we talk about putting your future at risk to take a stand and taking the long view, here's my leadership assignment for you. When you leave, or tonight or tomorrow morning when you wake up, spend a few minutes, like 15, just write your obituary. You can write it quickly, doesn't have to be perfect. Just think about in the future, when people are looking at your tombstone, what is it you want them to remember about you? Who were you? What is it you said no to? And who will miss you? So think about that, and that will help guide you and keep you aligned with who you are and what your legacy should be. So that's my presentation, and I just wonder if anybody has any questions or comments or anything they'd like to add. Thank you.
Can anyone unmute themselves?
I'll unmute myself and ask a question.
Yeah, I have to.
Jackie, thanks for organizing this, and Margaret, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. I mean, so when you think about when good leaders go bad, you've mentioned a couple of things in the context of politicians, but generally, are there any highlights that you could sort of point us to that might suggest things to look out for?
Well, what I think it's, if you're going to be a leader, you should be signing yourself up for a lifetime of personal growth, right? So so taking care to see how you're doing, to do sort of a 360 kind of review where people are giving you feedback. And you can even do that with clients. I often would ask my clients how they thought I did and if they thought that there was something that I could do better. And then I could incorporate that. So I think you have to remain humble, and you have to be self-aware. And some of these things are just they're who you are. But you have to have something. Yeah, you have to have something to hold on to. And I think our ethics rules are so well developed now. If we come at our leadership, some people come at their leadership position because of a religious or spiritual background or connection. But even if we don't, and we're coming at it as lawyers, we have our own book, which is our book of ethics, which addresses everything. So I think, you have to just continue to engage in education, not just education to be technically competent, but personal growth type education so that you can, maintain your status as a good leader.
Thank you.
I was going to say, Margaret, I think that leaders have to remember that they're role models and people will try to emulate them. And, I when I was the ethics officer training other, employees about ethics, I would say, how's it going to look if your behavior is reported above the fold on the front page of the New York Times? And how would your mother react to reading about it? So there's that.
As they're engaging in it, they think that if they've gotten so much acclaim and everyone tells them how great they are, then they're not going to be thinking about that. They're going to be thinking, oh, well, this is fine. I can do this. If they, I'm in the power position and it'll be okay. I'm invulnerable.
but I just wanted to ask you for some, some practical pointers on, when they say if you see something, say something about it, sort of thing, practical pointers about it, because I think everybody in their career faces these decisions every day. And as you said, there are consequences if you do something, because we all know good government isn't built on bad decisions. Good government's built on good decisions, and it's built on people taking a stand and doing the right thing. But there are consequences. So what are some practical pointers on how do you take a stand without like jeopardizing your livelihood and your
I,
kids' college fund?
I think that can be a little bit of skills training too. So you there's two aspects of that. It's telling your truth, but telling it in a way that it can be heard, right? So if someone just says, this is what I think, and you're all, throws everybody under the bus. They're speaking their truth. It's courageous, but they're not telling it in a way that it can be heard. So those are communication skills that can be learned, but it still takes the courage to say something in a meeting. This you can say it even as quietly as that, like, this just doesn't seem right to me, right? I'm just, this seems off. Something doesn't seem right, without, calling somebody on the carpet and saying what their behavior is wrong.
And are those skills being incorporated into law school curricula?
We are, as a result of the changes to the upcoming bar, law school curriculum is trying to adapt and to change a little bit more. It used to be in doctrinal classes. They're doctrinal classes. They're pushing that, and they shouldn't be skills classes. There's sort of been a clear delineation. This is doctrinal, this is clinical skills, and they shouldn't really meet. But now there's more of a push to give students more assessments and things like that. But skills training, individually, I suppose, when people bring it in, like in one of my classes now, I have them, when it's right. I introduced a listening skill training, had them just for 5 minutes practice that skill, 5 or 10 minutes. So I am inserting some of those things into the classes that I teach, but it's not part of the curriculum. The curriculum is sort of like a list of courses that they have to take and a number of experiential credits that they have to take. And they're focusing, we seem to be focusing heavily on bar passage and not so much on this. But another push of the ABA is professional development. So we have to incorporate that more now into our curriculum. So changes are coming, which I think are good, because people expect that you're going to graduate from law school and you kind of know how to argue, you know how to write and file a motion, and you have the judgment about what you should or shouldn't be doing, and you can hit the ground running. So I think it's going to move more in that direction.
That's great. That's encouraging. Thank you.
Was there anything else we had to talk about?
Margaret, this is Joe Benning.
Hi.
I'm not sure we've ever actually met before, but a couple of comments. First off, this was an excellent presentation, and I would highly encourage you to take it on the road wherever possible. I'm just coming out of 12 years in the legislature, and it was very surprising to me in the last 4 of those years to realize that I was the only sitting practicing lawyer in a legislative seat out of 180 lawmakers. I suspect very strongly that there are no sitting legislators who are practicing lawyers. That's a little factoid to add into your mix here, and I don't know why that is, except that we all go broke trying to run a legislative position at the same time we're doing our law practices. For those of you that are younger, in listening to you, one of the things that I have found much easier as time has gone on is to be able to deal with a client and give them a candid review about what they are facing. I
Mhm,
think that was very difficult in the early stages of practice.
mhm.
But as I personally am now able to say, look, have you ever actually gone through a jury trial to a client? And then say, well, I've been doing jury trials for 40 years. And this is what I see happening. And I explain to them what happens when a jury is assembled, members of their peers who are taken out of their normal day jobs and routines and paid $30 a day to sit there and listen to a case. They usually come in cross-eyed at my client because I'm a defense attorney in this particular example.
Mhm.
But I think with age, you develop this skill of being more candid as you go. I
Yeah,
cannot stress enough, however, that for those who are coming out of law school, they need to have the humility to understand that that takes time and you can't just blow into a given situation brand new and expect somebody to give you that respect. The final comment I have I was very surprised to hear you give thus as our marching orders. This past election season, David Zuckerman and I were running for lieutenant governor. And we were at a forum in Rutland where the former president of Castleton State University was the moderator. And his last question for both of us was, you are at your funeral. What is it you hope to hear people talk about you? And both David and I were very struck by that. You could have heard a pin drop as we tried to assemble our thoughts. But that is a question that I think, if introduced much earlier in our lives, would have given us a little bit of direction on how to proceed.
right.
Those are
Right.
just some observations I wanted to give you some feedback on, but this is an excellent presentation and I thank you very much for it.
Thank you. I think that leadership should be part of the curriculum. That's my position. It absolutely should be because lawyers are leaders, period. So we need to be training them to have those particular skills. It's interesting you should say, I pulled up my slide here. If I'm still sharing, I guess I can stop sharing, but um, it says almost half the member of Congress are or were lawyers. I did the current Congress and it's more like 33%. So it was half, it's 33%. You're telling me it was one, which is a little scary. Um, uh, so that might be changing. And I agree with you with regard to the ability to give candid advice. That's going to come with along with confidence that you build as you become more competent in your area. You're going to be able to say, that's not how it works, or you hired me to be your lawyer and I'm giving you this advice, right? You can choose to accept it or reject it, but the lawyer can also choose to whether or not they're going to continue to represent a client. But yeah, I mean, you can, you can say that to them, right? You hired me for my advice. I'm giving you my advice and come up with your sentences. It may not be what you want to hear. I'm just, you know, when in the divorce context, I always say, it's great to talk to your friends, but keep in mind, they're your cheerleaders, right? They're your cheerleaders. They're there to support you. I'm here to help you get to the other side of this and still with your integrity intact and to try to, make it as easy on everybody as possible. Like whatever what their goals were from the beginning, which hopefully were those. So, yeah, I don't think we focus on it enough. And it was just interesting as I tried to put this together, and that's how it came together. Like I said, the alum contacted us, and I started looking at more about leadership theory and some of the specifics with regard to the people that I mentioned, and it all just fits, right? It just fits, and um, these are the qualities. We have some. We can work on more of them. And I get concerned because I think a lot of people don't want to step into the limelight and be the leader. Sometimes the least charismatic can be the best leaders. We get fooled by that. We think that they have to give a great presentation and that makes them a good leader, but that's certainly not all that it takes.
By the way, I encourage lawyers to get into the legislature. We are trained to understand how words can impact on people.
Mhm.
And it is very discouraging, having left there, to know that there are two judiciary committees. The House Judiciary Committee has one former lawyer there. The Senate has none. And that's very discouraging to me as a lawyer, to know that there are decisions being made that the long-term consequences of which are just not properly thought out. And that if you get into the position of being able to encourage young people who are coming out of law school, I highly recommend they take a look at the legislature. It's a great experience.
That's great. I'll push that in my classes. We'll have an occasional student who's on the select board, the local select board, um, in addition to whatever they're doing at the law school, at the law and graduate school. So, yeah. All right. Anybody else want to just say hello? I can only see 5, like, I can't see the other people, or maybe they gotten off because we're past our time, right? We're at our time.
I think you have 2 more minutes. I just want to mention, having been very involved in the business school world for many years, just how strongly graduate schools of business have moved in the direction of teaching leadership and focusing on self-awareness and focusing on ethical considerations in business. So I mean, it seems like other graduate schools will get there and probably should move there strongly. So I'm happy to hear you suggest that this is something that you're very much in favor of.
Yeah. Well, there are law schools that are offering that have leadership institutes. I was looking up University of Chicago. They just imported the leadership training from the business school over to the law school, and they made some changes when they did that. But yeah, I think it should be an area of focus.
Oh, that sounds awesome. We should create a leadership institute. Wouldn't that be great?
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, and we've got this huge, our focus lately has been on our strategic plan and moving forward. And now we've created 2 schools, and we have this huge need for faculty to fill the basic classes for competency. So it gets more difficult to come in now and say, oh, and now I want to teach a leadership class. But, we've got to get everything staffed and operational, but it's critical. It's what we do. Right.
That
That's more
leadership
important.
institute would bridge the law and the graduate programs beautifully, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, Dave, you just got to go out and generate like $7 million for it, just to kick it off.
Charity
No
problem.
small feat, right?
Well, it's all about priorities.
Wow. That's great. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us. If there aren't any more questions, I just want to remind everyone that this event is brought to you by the Vermont Law and Graduate School Alumni Association, in an effort to provide opportunities to connect alumni throughout the country and around the world. We think our school is a great institution, and we hope you'll consider helping us keep it that way by making a gift. And you can do that by going to connect.vermontlaw.edu. And we'd also like to remind you to save the date for our reunion, which is Friday, June 2nd and Saturday, June 3rd. And we hope to see you there.